Hello everyone. We've got Simon Darlow here. Simon, would you like to just introduce yourself and talk about what you do, kind of thing?
All right, yeah. My name's Simon Darlow. I'm a composer and songwriter. I had my first hits a long time ago, back in 1982-ish, working with various people like Trevor Horn, who was a huge influence on my career, a record producer. And I'm still doing music to this day. I have stuff on air on television every day around the world. And I've also been the deputy chairman of PRS for the last 9 years, although that's now come to an end. It's ending as we speak, actually, and a new chapter taken over, which is great. These things have a finite time. So that's essentially what I do. I write and produce music.
Brilliant. If anybody has any questions for Simon at any point during the session, put it in the question. Maybe get you on stage if you want to. If not, we'll ask it for you. So Simon, I'm going to take it all the way back to when you were young. Was music something you knew you always wanted to pursue, and did you think you'd end up as a songwriter?
Well, I grew up in music. My father was a composer and a conductor and a professor at the Royal College of Music, and my mother was a singer, so I was rather sort of bathed in it. But I do remember telling my dad when I was 5 that I wanted to be like Bach and be a composer when I grew up. And that kind of stayed with me, actually. The thing was, I never heard any pop music because my dad hated it until I was about 12. I was a cathedral chorister. I was head chorister of Chichester Cathedral. And there was a flu epidemic. And this is going back into 1972, when most of you probably weren't even thought of. But anyway, there was a flu epidemic and we were all in bed. And they let us have radios, and which was a rare treat in those Orwellian days, you know. And I heard pop music. I heard T-Rex's Jeepster, and I thought, "What's this?" And that was it. And I thought, "I want to do this." So probably I was 12, 13, heading towards the rebellion stage. You know, how to reject your parents and all this stuff. I thought, this is a good way of doing it. I won't be a concert cellist. I'll just get into rock and roll. So I got a music scholarship to Lancing College, and then just carried on writing music. And I just went to the music school and wrote songs every day, and did precious little else, actually. And so it did hit me very, very young that I wanted to compose and write, and I'm still doing it.
Brilliant. So what got you into the music business as such, the music industry?
How I got finally through to the magical door into this wonderful secret world of glamour and showbiz, you mean?
That's the one.
Where everything is, fairy lights and tinsel. Well, it's highly secret, you know, and not many of you get to see this stuff. Actually, no, I did a few odd jobs in my late teens. One of them was working at a keyboard store called Rod Argent's in Denmark Street in London. And so I was sort of demoing keyboards for people and stuff in about 1978, I think, something like that. 79, 80, around there, maybe towards 80. And I used to meet a lot of the stars who'd come in for their various bits of kit. And one of the people I met was Trevor Horn, the record producer. And we got chatting, and he said, "Oh, I've just split up with my partner in the Buggles, Jeff Downs, and you know, he's taken all the keyboards. What do you do?" So I told him what I used to play, you know. And he said, "Oh, great. Well, why don't you come and do a session?" I thought, "What? Okay, yeah, sure." You know, I feigned huge confidence and all this stuff, you know. And I went down to Sami Studios, which he owned. And it was the first time I'd been in a 24-track studio in my life. And I did a session for him, which seemed to be okay. And then I spoke to him again. He said, "Have you got any songs?" So I dug out my little Porter Studio demo of some songs. And he rang back 2 days later, or rather his wife, Jill Sinclair, who was also his business partner, sadly no longer with us, rang back and said, "We think you've got something to say. Would you like to come and see us?" So I went and had a chat. And they offered me a publishing deal with their newly formed Perfect Songs. And I joined the Buggles temporarily to finish the second Buggles album. And that was the magical moment for me. So life sort of transformed in an instant, you know.
Brilliant. No, that's really incredible. It's weird. I find it interesting that you went from such a classical background to ended up writing all these pop hits. How much of that do you transfer over?
Actually, I think a lot of it has. The first, I think it was the first hit I had was a song called "Give Me Back My Heart," which was for Dollar. And if you listen to the chord progression, it is very classical, and it's got thirds in the bass and stuff, which seemed very natural to me, and it translates well into a pop format. But it wasn't. It was all slightly classically underneath, and it does make a difference. And it's still in there actually. I mean, I listen to a lot of music in lots of different forms, but somewhere along the line, the heart of it is often in stuff I listen to, particularly Baroque, Bach and Handel from the early days, and the various cadences and stuff. And so it's been a huge influence on my life.
Okay. So what does your songwriting process look like? Do you start with lyrics, or do you start with chords, or
it can be anything, to be honest with you. And it's varied over the years. When it's like when my dear friend Bruce Woolley and I used to write together, it was kind of like song tailoring. Trevor or somebody would ring up, so we want a song for Dollar, or we want a song for this group, and it's a bit like tailoring. You'd measure them up a bit and think, well, actually, what would they sing about? So you might have a lyrical idea that you'd start from, or you think, well, this needs to be up tempo. But by and large, the best stuff comes from just some sort of feeling, really. Often I tend to like to have a lyric lying around in my head, actually, these days. Because if you can be out talking to people, and you'll get a juxtaposition of stuff. Somebody will say something and you'll hear somebody else another, and it'll make you think of something completely obscure. And sometimes that just translates as a musical thought, and you've got it. Or you might be feeling something. It's like, oh, baby, you've broke my heart yet again. Or, it's a real feeling. And but you need this stuff. And I think all the best music comes from a real feeling. And trying to construct pop hits, and lots of people do try it, it tends to be not so good. You can make stuff look great, i.e. sound great, in inverted commas, but unless it's got the true, So I mean, sometimes I'll have a guitar riff. I mean, it's not always the same, but I try and get it. I sit and write reams of lyrics at the moment, last thing at night, watching science fiction films. That's my current sort of lockdown inspiration, to drift off around the universe, in some obscure vessel, and reflect and look back on things. So that I find that quite a good source. But other times I just sit down and fiddle around with the guitar, and you think, oh, that's quite interesting. And then I'll go through my little dictaphone, and then it all sews together. And once you've got something, then you chip away at it and apply the craft.
Brilliant. So I've looked at your portfolio, and you've worked with like a whole range of artists, from Cliff Richard and Shirley Bassey to quite experimental artists. I know at the moment you're working with Toyah and Robert Fripp. Yep. For those who don't know, Robert Fripp is the guitar player in King Crimson. I had to do some Googling. So, do you ever change your songwriting approach depending on the artist or the genre?
Well, yeah, a little. It's kind of, I mean, with Toyah and I have been working, actually, we wrote our first song together in 1977 when we were both really quite young. And then we've written on and off and done a lot of albums together. And we had a #1 album the year before last, actually, on the Amazon chart, which that's 5 minutes at #1. It's not like the old days, You're up and it's statistical. Anyway, but that was great. And that was very much, Toyah likes to rock out as I do. So it was very much a guitar-based album, whereas before it used to be keyboards back in the early 80s when we did it together. But it's interesting doing this album we're doing now, which Robert's very kindly agreed to do some guest guitars on. Now we're evolving it. I found the space where it suits his stuff, and we've just found a kind of a meeting place so you've got two different types of guitar playing going on, which adds to the whole, which supports Toyah. So I will always change, and also that with all the TV music I've done, one of the great things about TV music is somebody says we want it blue and it's got to last 10 seconds long, and it has to tell a story about this, and you go, okay. So here you are, right? It's 2 minutes of blue, mate. And it's I've always loved that. Actually, there's nothing like a few parameters to give you some, your artistic freedom within 2 minutes is fantastic. But so I will adapt. I've even done jazz, which I'm not very good at. Actually, it's not natural to me, but I have done it. Horses for courses. It's I'm sort of able to work in just about most form. You just study it a bit and absorb it, and then interpret it.
So I was doing some research on Robert, and I found out about his new standard tuning for guitars. So for the guitarist, it goes from the lowest string to the highest string. It's C, G, D, A, E, G. So completely different to standard. Do you have to adapt what you write for that, or is he playing around you?
No, he plays around what we do.
Okay, brilliant. That makes things a lot easier then.
Although standard tuning me.
Yeah.
Don't understand anything else. All that other nonsense he does, just don't. It's brilliant because the way he does things is just different, and it creates all its own magic. It's quite spectacular, actually. Although, as a result of this, I did try the dadgad tuning the other day, which is the classic Celtic thing, which all the blues people use. And Kashmir was a classic. Have you all heard of Led Zeppelin, or is that a bit too old?
We hope some of them have, Jude.
Good beat combo, I've always thought, Anyway, their classic song Kashmir is the dadgad tuning, all open strings and things. So I got into that just 4 days ago, actually, and I'm attempting to do something in that format.
Oh, that's cool. So you mentioned your TV music that you've done.
Yeah.
How is that different to your traditional like pop songwriting?
Well, it depends what it is, to be honest with you, is the simple answer. Often with TV music, they'll say, oh, we want it like this. And it can often be something that's floating around the charts currently, because they don't tend to look that far forward. But so that when it's like that, it's kind of relatively easy, really. You have and they used to have most theme tunes used to be 30 seconds, but they're now 10 if you're lucky, which is about 4 bars. It can get crazy and a bit brutal, and it's not as much fun, to be honest with you. Although it's always a challenge to try and condense something into such a short space of time. But it just varies so much. All that, I remember I did the Premier League anthem with a couple of friends of mine, 3 years ago. It was 2013 to 16 one, I think, or something. And there was a whole process where they wanted an anthem, and then it went all around the houses, and then the video editors got involved and said, oh, we want it like Woodkid and all this sort of stuff. It's like, oh God, all right. So off we all went, dancing around all these versions. And in the end, I thought, no, I think what they want is probably a piece of classical music. So I wrote this very simple, it was a bit like a bar chorale, except it only had one word, which is Gloria right at the end, as in Gloria in Excelsis, this like. And they went for it. So that was it. And it became the handshake at the grounds and everything. And we recorded it with an orchestra in Budapest, I think we did it. But, sometimes people think they know what they want, but it's actually not what they want at all. And you have to be prepared to go, no, I think you should do this. And,
in those situations, how do you persuade somebody that what they actually want is something else?
Well, I think what we did in the end then is we gave them their latest idea, and did a version, and then I said, oh, by the way, there's this, and you can do it like this, and I think this is probably might work really well. We did this really emotional version, and then we did one with a beat, and they went, oh yeah, no, that's good. They played it to all their 19 different people who have to sign these things off, and that was it. So that worked out.
Good. So going back a little bit, you mentioned Trevor Horn.
Yeah.
What was it like to work with him? Such like a legendary producer.
Well, it was absolutely amazing for me. I mean, they all used to call me the kid, actually. I was quite a lot younger than most of them. And I was sort of some kind of freak that somehow managed to walk into their scene, and I couldn't quite work out where I'd come from. Because he was hanging out with all these rock legends and stuff, and I'd be standing there playing keyboards, and I'd see Steve Howe standing next to me thinking, but it was very odd. He taught me so much. Actually, it's a funny thing, that prior to working at Rod Argent's, I was shifting furniture for a theatrical company, and I heard Video Killed the Radio Star, a song you may all know, I don't know, by the Buggles. Just a fabulous, fabulous song. And I heard it and thought, I've never heard anything like that, because I had no idea what a record producer did. And I thought, that's what a record producer does. I'd really like to be like that one day. And 2 years later, I was in that group. I mean, it was the weirdest piece of visualization I've ever done, but it came true. And it was, so he has a completely different way of viewing everything. And it's, he is, you know, he goes for precision on a level that has killed many musicians, you know, including me at times, frankly. Yeah. But he's brilliant, and you know, he just has a way of creating extremes and really cutting to the chase, and he'll chip away at a song for ages and ages and ages and ages until he thinks it's absolutely at its most, at its clearest and shiniest, if you like. Mm-hmm. And without any doubt, so that anyone who hears it will like it, which is probably why he's had so many hit records.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to talk a little bit about Slave to the Rhythm, which I believe you worked on.
Well, Bruce Woody and I wrote the original song, yeah.
So we've the second, I know the third years have. I think the second years might have done. Mm. We've worked on the original stems for that song, which Dave has got hold of. I was just wondering, how did you get into a position to be able to work on that song?
Okay, this is what Trevor rang me up one day and said he just had a big hit with "Relax" by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and he said, "We haven't got a follow-up. We need a song. Will you go and write something?" Because I was signed to his publishing company, Trevor's publishing company. So I rang up Bruce, and I had this groove going, which was very much like Nutbush City Limits by Tina Turner. And Bruce came around and I said, "Oh, it's like Slaves on a Chain Gang." And Bruce said to me, "I was slave to the rhythm of the chain gang." And then we went slave to the rhythm. Now, Bruce will probably tell you this story completely differently, but that's how I remember it. This is classic amongst songwriters, you know. They never remember. Anyway, so that's that. And so it happened. So we wrote this song, and we really liked it, actually, this original version. And then we decided to record it ourselves as the Bash Street Kids. So we toddled off down to the studio that belonged to John Fox from Ultravox, and started recording it. And while we were recording it, Trevor rang up and said, "I'm going to do something with Grace Jones, and I want to do Slave to the Rhythm." And Bruce and I looked at each other, and somewhere along the line, Slave to the Rhythm and Grace Jones, something, you know, it just looked so right. So off we went and started the process. And then Bruce carried on with him. I was working on another album. Bruce carried on, and it was originally going to be a single, and Trevor had just bought a synclavier, which is I don't know whether you guys know about synclaviers. It was one of the early original samplers, but hugely, hugely, hugely expensive. You could have bought a house with it, you know, but they were quite amazing, the recording system and samplers. And they started extemporizing the whole thing, and they did 8 versions of the song in completely different ways. And it ended up as this thing. It was quite magical, actually.
Myself there. We're going to get one of the students up, Corbin, who's just put a question in the Q&A bit. Angela, if we could, or if Corbin's already there, can we turn camera on and whatnot?
Hi there. Can you hear me? All right.
Yep.
Hello.
Brilliant. Hi there. It's sort of two quick questions, really. The first of all is just with in sort of today's modern pop climate, and especially like radio focused pop, do you think that songwriting as a skill can be taught to people, or do you think that there is some kind of sort of something innate that you have to have? And also just to add on to that, how do you sort of feel about modern as a I want to say veteran of the industry, but that sounds almost a little bit rude, so I'm not going to say that.
No,
but how do you feel about modern pop and the sort of climate of things that there are at the moment?
Okay, so the first part to your question, you can teach people how to develop a song idea, and you can teach people the craft, which is what Trevor taught me, incidentally. He kind of really showed me how you construct a thing, but you've got to feel, you've got to have real ideas. Anybody can get GarageBand now, as I'm sure you're aware, and knock something up with all the stock sounds, and it just sounds like it's cool. but it isn't. You need to get people to react. You need to, you need people to feel stuff, and that's the magic of music in general. It doesn't matter whether it's popular or not. You need a response. It's about human response, and I think we've got a long way away from this. So that's sort of so you can't. You can learn about it and how to apply it, but you can't. You've either got that thing in you, or you haven't. And I think the people in my experience that know they have it, really know they have it. You get a few deluded people along the way who just never give up, but everybody knows they can't do it. But if you know, it's in you, and you just get better at it. It's part of it. You have to. What Jill said to me, you have something to say. You have something to say, and it's almost a torrent that you can't stop. I just got to do this, so you can get better. In terms of what's happening with modern music and composition, I'm not that impressed with what's going on at the moment. I have to say, I am obviously an older generation, so I have to try not to sound like an old fart at this point. But I don't see that. I mean, the era that I listened to a lot of music in when I grew up, obviously, was the 70s, and it was so diverse. And it was still cool to be a player and want to be good at it. There were great drummers. Somebody wanted to be a great bass player, a great singer, and it was a huge creativity, and it produced such diverse stuff. And performance was key. You'd go in and lay down a backing track together, and then you'd add to it. You can still do that now, of course. It doesn't stop anybody. But with the magic of technology, there's an upside and a downside. It's very easy to sit down in the box on laptops like we all are now, and get out GarageBand or Logic or whatever, and dig in, and you buy the same software that everybody else can buy, and it suddenly all becomes pretty much the same. And so I don't often hear things that really make me go, wow, what was that? But I'm sure there is good music. I mean, there is so much music, out there, but I think the sort of the commercially focused stuff is just not so great. I mean, that's a terribly sweeping thing to say. I am aware of that, but there is always good music. I just think that now it's become easier for people to get at a finished output, if you like. It doesn't mean to say that there's lots more better music. I don't see it. Do you like music from the older days, or
personally? Yes, I do. I was very surprised at the Robert Fripp comments before actually having to Google him. I'm disappointed in you, Alec. I'm not. I'm joking. But I personally believe that there is still a lot of very creative output out there. I just think that perhaps it's a bit more hidden by like I said before, by the sort of radio pop that tends to be sort of shoved in everyone's faces nowadays. But I do think there's a lot of creativity out there, personally, at least. But
yeah, it's good to hear. Yeah, actually, I've got a 26-year-old son who does fantastic stuff that I would never have done in a million years. And he doesn't just use technology. He's still got his heart and expression, and so I'm sure it is there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for answering. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Brilliant. We've had a couple of other questions. I'll just read them out. So Thomas has asked, as young people are coming into a broad music industry, is it worthwhile to focus on a specific career role or to have a broader approach to a music career?
If you've got something specific you want to do, just go for it. But you see, for me, it was always I wanted to write music and do it, so I couldn't really. I actually just wanted to be a pop star with it, but I ended up doing it behind the scenes more than the front of house stuff. Although I still go out front occasionally, but I think if you just want to get into music in general, then I think I would be very broad, because there's lots of different avenues and things, and it's the models are not the same anymore. Because if you want to get into it, you've got to make a living out of it, and it's never been easy, but it's much tougher now, especially with all the streaming stuff, which I'm sure we'll come on to as a later question. No doubt, Alex. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's cool to be broad, be open, but don't be so completely spurious is what I'd say, kind of know roughly what you want to do, because then you'll apply yourself in the right direction, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you have any like pieces of advice for young songwriters trying to make it at the moment?
Well, the first thing is to write great songs. I know that sounds like an obvious answer, but by that I mean write from the heart, write from real experience, from something that triggers an emotion in you, something that's just, there's been a million love songs, but there's lots of different ways of saying I love you, for example, to give it its most trivial. And that's why this it's still maintained. So there's always another great love song from time to time, because it's somebody else feeling something in a slightly different way, or it's their interpretation of that experience. Always dig up all the best songs have got a kernel of truth in them before you apply the craft. So don't be afraid to be real, I think is the key.
Okay, we've got a question from, and I probably will pronounce this wrong, so I do apologize. David?
That was really good pronunciation. Well done. That was really great.
Thank you. Cheers.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Howdy. So, plagiarism, really, do you ever worry about that? Like either other musicians copying your style or your songwriting elements, or yourself sometimes subconsciously tackling an idea that someone else has done?
I think in all writing in general, and this even goes back to the Baroque era. There were groups of people like Bach, Handel, who were very influenced by a guy called Buxtehude, and it was all the music was of its type, and they kind of all got off on each other. And I'm sure if you listen to Paul McCartney talking about all this, they all used to be, they'd hear a song, he would say, "Oh, I heard such and such, and let's write one of those," So there's always an element of reinterpretation in all of us, I think. And I certainly listen to great songs and say, "Oh God, I wish I'd written that." And and you can use that as a springboard to take you somewhere completely different, which is not plagiarism. That's just influence. There are people who just blatantly nick stuff, and sometimes they get away with it, and sometimes they don't. Somebody tried to nick one of Bruce's and mine's song once, but there was a minor legal exchange, and it stopped. But it does happen, and but I think it's cool to be original, but you can listen to somebody else's idea to find your own originality.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Okay.
So just to move it along a little bit, I've seen that you've done quite a lot of political lobbying over the years, Simon.
Yep.
For example, you took aim at Google and SoundCloud for allowing illegal downloads in 2015, but more recently at the 2020 Creators Conference in Brussels, you took aim at buyout contracts.
Yeah.
In the speech, you mentioned that it will affect a lot of young songwriters and musicians. I was wondering if you could explain what they are and how we, as young songwriters and musicians, can avoid them.
Okay, it's all about price. This is a very competitive world for people in media, television, for example, writing music for that. And if somebody comes along and offers you 200 quid and no royalties, and you're desperate for 200 quid, if you take 200 quid, you undermine the value of the entire market. Because music is worth something. Copyright is vital. It's the means by which I've earned all my money, frankly, most of it, over the last, well, it's nearly 40 years actually. And if you allow the buyout model to gain hold across the market, then we just become employees and we'll get paid less and less and less. So there's no upside for us. So often what happens is large companies will use their power, or their buying power essentially, to try and reduce the price and keep as much of the back end as possible. So the royalties, they'll just take all the royalties as if they're their own. It's very difficult to fight back, but I think young people should be very, very aware that when they go into this marketplace, if somebody says, "Oh, look, do this for nothing now and we'll call you again," they will call you again when they want something for nothing. So you're not going to suddenly get this, oh, we've got, do that one for nothing. Oh, here's another one, by the way. It's 20 grand. It's 20 grand commission. It's unlikely. It's unlikely. So it's very hard when you're starting out, because you need to get heard. You need to get in and amongst people. But just remember, you have a value. Your music has a value. And if it's something you'd like to have as a career, if you don't have any value, you won't be able to sustain you won't be able to pay your bills or eat. So just be aware that it has value, and that copyright is the secret to your value. And you want to hang on to your copyrights at every single opportunity. However, just to put some balance in this, there are instances where a buyout is financially good for a writer, depending on what level they're working, depending on what the market is. I mean, the games industry, although, you know, which is massive, I know a lot of people who do exceptionally well out of it. I mean, real big money, and that's all on the buyout model. Although this might be changing as the modes of delivery of games is changing. There might be a whole other way to look at this. But so it's not all bad buyout, but by and large, when you get corporations abusing their position and it's their dominant position, then it is bad news, and the market will shrink, and the value to us as writers and our worth will shrink. You know,
Fantastic.
Short. That wasn't that short, was it?
No, honestly, don't worry. We're just going to go back and ask some of the Q&A questions before we start moving on to PRS. I think John's got one.
Yeah, we've got a question from Matt, if he's ready to come up.
Give me a second. This one. Hello. Ooh.
There we go.
There he is.
Yeah, it's all right. Your gel's looking all right.
You look lovely, Matt. Don't worry.
So, because of the new generations obviously being interested in different things, have you tried to do your research when creating new songs, when writing new songs, in order to hit those younger generations, you know, as they can, you know, bring more money?
I don't think of it like that, and I never have actually. I listen to lots of stuff, but I have a kind of core way of doing things that I like to do, and I tend to follow my nose in that way, because it's just me expressing. And you know, I know plenty of people who are very cynical about this. They listen to all the latest stuff and they do everything in the new clothes, which is fine. It's one way of doing things, but it's never appealed to me. I might hear certain things that I hadn't heard before and think, oh, that's quite inspiring. But I don't. It's a business for me, and it has been for years. But it's a business because I love doing it, and I have to work from that way round. In the past, whenever I've tried to sort of be very cynical about knocking things off, you know, and it doesn't work. It's not real. I don't enjoy it. It rarely gets you any financial benefit. Others may be different to me, but that's how it is for me. I still just work from what I feel and, you know, what I want to say, really. And as I mentioned a bit earlier, it's slightly different if you work in a commissioned context for a program that needs to say X. Then you can use your ability to kind of work within that framework, if you like. If it's just you need a song about, actually, there was a TV program I did called Bookaboo, which was about a singing dog, and they had a band. And it was kind of like Jackanory. I don't know, it's reading stories, and this dog couldn't play drums properly unless he had a story read to him. You know, it's just I've done a lot of good things in my time. Anyway, I ended up becoming the voice of Growler, the bass player, who was also a dog. And anyway, so I worked within certain confines there, because I don't normally wake up howling, you know. So so you know, be broad-minded.
Cheers for the question, Matt.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, next question is from Cameron. If we can get Cameron up.
Hello. Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned earlier about changing creative process for working with a different genre. I was wondering whether if you could recall any like breakthrough pieces of technology which also forced you to change your creative process. For example,
I don't. Okay, I mean, certainly one of the biggest things, of course, was sampling when it became for the masses. When you could have real instruments at your fingertips in any form, that was just amazing, because you could suddenly work in having gone from sort of synthesizers where it's very much a synthesized sound. I mean, you know, we at the time we'd have a Jupiter 4 or something, and play a string patch, and you convince yourself it sounded like strings, and of course it sounded absolutely nothing like it at all. It sounded wonderful, but it's of itself, you know. But the minute you could start actually getting replications of the real things, you suddenly had a much broader brush to orchestrate with, simply. I mean, so, and you could do it in your room or in a studio, as opposed to having to hire loads of things to experiment. So that was the biggest thing. And I think also that when the sequencer, you know, became like a recorder, those two things just gave you so much power. And it changes the way you work, because, you know, once upon a time you'd routine the song with your co-writer or whatever, then you'd hit play on the tape machine, or record on the tape machine, and off you'd go, and you'd do your best to get through 3 minutes or whatever it was without screwing up. And that was the thing you then built on. But nowadays, of course, you can work on a couple of bars for an hour, which I do when I play cello, because I can't play it properly anymore.
That's brilliant. So with like Trevor Horn, were you writing with Trevor Horn with the Fairlight? Were you like writing for his style, and were you taking into consideration the Fairlight itself, or?
Not really, to be honest with you, because I was a very young thing at the time, and he was, you know, I discovered all these things because of him. So I would just write the way I wrote. I'd just do my little Porter Studio demos, and he would take them and just apply this huge cutting edge stuff to it. And it was mind blowing, actually. Videotech particularly, actually, and Give Me Back My Heart, the $2 records. He used the technology brilliantly to make things sound just different, you know, very musical, but very, very different. And so that was quite stunning, actually.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Cheers, Cameron.
Bye.
Pleasure.
So we're just going to move it on a little bit towards your involvement with PRS for Music.
Yep.
I was wondering if you could tell us how you got involved with them.
That was, I think, 2009 or ish, or around that time. A friend of mine said, actually, he was my publisher at the time. He said he thought had I ever considered being a board director at PRS for Music? And I said no. He said, why don't you? And then I met somebody else who was also a writer who was on the board there, who said a similar thing, and they both encouraged me to sort of get involved. So I stood for the board, and a couple of years later I got elected. And it was kind of because I'd ever since the early part of my career, for some reason, people would come up to me and ask advice about how things worked on all kinds of levels, how the industry worked, because I was always interested in that. I was always interested in how contracts worked. I often didn't like some of the contracts that I was offered, you know, and despite the fact I was a young whippersnapper, I used to say so, which, you know, used to piss people off a bit, but I kind of, so it got my appetite going for, you know, the other side of it, because once I was fortunate enough to be making a living at it, I suddenly realized that, you know, it wasn't just about the art, it was about maintaining a business relationship with the industry, and to do that you have to maximize your return from it in order to be able to earn from it. And then you soon realize an awful lot of people swarming around you who will take chunks out the royalty stream, every which way you can imagine, so you end up with very little. And so I learned you need to hang on to as much of it as possible. So PRS was an absolute baptism. I mean, it's one of the best things I ever did, actually. I wasn't quite sure what it was when I got on, but it became like a university education for me, because I never had one. I left school at 16 to pursue the rock and roll stuff. And then I ended up in things like audit committees, you know, looking at the guts of a business, and it just taught me so much. And also work. I mean, John's coming on, or is on now. That's the public affairs department that he was head of, still is, but he's got a broader role now. And I started working with that department in terms of advocating for creators in parliamentary terms, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I still do it from time to time, and I really do enjoy it, because you suddenly realise that policymakers need to understand what the likes of me or your aspiring writing students go through to create music, and what it's like for them, because the public perception is you know of Elton John, who's a multi-billionaire, and pop stars are either rich or not, but actually there's tranches of very successful or not quite so successful musicians and songwriters who all earn a living. It's part of the huge ecosystem. They all earn a living out of music, and you have to understand it from their point of view, because otherwise the policy decisions get made the wrong way round, and they lose out. So I suddenly realized there's a role, and I mean essentially what it boiled down to is, in that capacity I just used to go and talk about myself, and it's once you're able to do that and you relay your experience, and not being like high street famous, I could go in and say, you won't know who I am, but I'm Simon Darlow, but you might have heard some of my music. They go, oh, right, okay. Then they realize there's tons of people like me who write successful music, and they can understand the importance of those. The parliamentary people, you're like a small business, a small enterprise business. And once they understand that, they suddenly see the ecosystem and not just the headlines. So it's been absolutely amazing, the whole thing, actually. And I've thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer to how did you get into it?
That's no worries at all. We've just got one quick question from Alex, and then we'll invite John up once we've got that.
Sure.
So yeah, if we get Alex on.
Hiya. I was just wondering, while working at PRS, what skills did you pick up that were perhaps a bit maybe different and new to you than you found on the composing scene? And also, how do you think, with copyright and YouTube especially being like the major factor with like all the creators, how do you think in the future copyright's going to kind of like monitor how music's kind of like spread around or used, so it still keeps the value in music and artists have a bit of value in it still?
Yeah, okay. So the first part of your question was what?
What skills did you pick up that were perhaps different?
Okay, what skills did I pick up? Well, in terms of music, nothing specifically, but there was what I found was I got to meet an awful lot of very, very bright, well-educated people all over the world. And I found that super stimulating. And it also started to take up a lot of my time. So because my brain was kind of on full more, when I was doing my composition, I had to do it much more quickly. And I found it really, really helped, because it kind of just got your brain working in a different way. I learned all sorts of things about analysis and understanding how deals are put together, how people think. So all this kind of, weirdly enough, feeds back into your creative side. So that's a very short answer to that part of the question. In terms of YouTube, you're really asking about the value of, this is a big thorny one, this YouTube especially, and I'm sure when John gets on, we'll talk more about it. But it's to do with the way the law was set up, very briefly, back in about 97 when the internet was born. And there was a bunch of laws which were basically called safe harbor, which took the responsibility away from the people supplying the pipe, i.e. YouTube's. So it made them non-liable for the content of their pipe, if you like. Now, life has changed since 1997, as I'm sure you're aware. And these people have all become broadcasters, their services, but a lot of them use this to not pay good rates. The battle is still on. It's getting better. YouTube have got better, but it's still nowhere near where we'd like it to be. This then tumbles into streaming and the value of streaming, which I don't know how deep you guys have got into it, but you need an awful lot of streams to make money. And there is a lot of money in the music business at the moment, again, which is why so many people want to invest in it. So it's very tricky, because it's a kind of winner takes all. If you do become Taylor Swift or whatever, you can make huge money out of this. But and perhaps, again, when John's on, we'll talk in more detail. You could perhaps ask him too. But it's very, at PRS, we do our level best to get the value of the licenses up so that we can pay more money to the writers and publishers. But you're constantly battling against one legislation, having the legislation to make sure that people pay properly. The tech companies have such huge market force that it's hard to fight them. I mean, there've been some real scraps with Google and YouTube because they have the most incredible, unlimited budget PR machine to counter. I mean, they've said it affects free speech, all kinds of nonsense, just to reduce our value. Anyway, I won't start ranting at this point, but it does light my touch paper a bit. But so actually, I tell you what it does. When I was commenting a few minutes ago about people upholding their value over buyouts, it's the same principle. It's all the people coming up, all the young composers and writers. You've just got to hang on to your sense that your music is worth something, and don't sell it out, even if it means you don't get 100 quid that day. Or so. It's a big ask because I know what it's like to not have any money, and you're growing, but it's up to all of us collectively, those successful and those on the way up and not successful yet, to hold on to their own sense of value.
Okay, cheers, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Cheers, Alex.
Okay, pleasure.
So yeah, can we bring John into the call? Hi, John.
Here's Johnny.
Yeah, you can just about hear.
Yeah.
Hi, John. I was just wondering if you could let everyone know who you are and what you do at PRS.
Yeah, absolutely. I apologise because this is the third laptop I've used to try and join this call, part of which was negotiating with my 13-year-old son why this was more important than his geography lesson. So I don't imagine he's going to become a geologist when he grows up. Yeah, my name's John Mottram. I'm currently a Director of Communications and Public Affairs at PRS. Been there for about 8 years. And throughout that period worked across a number of issues with PRS, worked with Simon for a lot of that time. First time I realized how much of your career was linked to canines, Simon, and it was actually very interesting to hear some of the things Simon was saying today, because one of the things that's sometimes not really recognized is PRS is owned and controlled by its members. So of our 150,000 members, they own PRS, and and we have a duty to the decisions we make and doing it in the best interest of all of those members. And people like Simon, who give up their time to sit on our boards and sit on our committees, are fundamental to us understanding how we can support songwriters and publishers and understand the way that the market is changing. So it's a really important part of that kind of relationship.
Brilliant. You touched on it slightly there, but could you explain for everyone who might not know exactly what PRS is and what it does and how it works?
So I guess the simplest way often to describe PRS is in absence of PRS, if you were a broadcaster, a TV company or a radio company, on an annual basis, you would probably need to get a license from hundreds of thousands of songwriters, composers and publishers all around the world and negotiate all of those deals separately in order to play their music on Radio 1 or on BBC 1, for example, in the case of the BBC. Effectively, what PRS is a collective management organisation for the performing rights. So, a broadcaster, a streaming service, a pub, a club, a business can come to PRS and get one license. And from that license, they can use the works of all of our members and all of the members of the 100 or so societies that we have deals with around the world. So from our perspective, from the user perspective, it's one license. From our members' perspective, it's the ability to have your rights bundled in with everyone else's, therefore maximizing the value of those rights when they're licensed. And more importantly, last year PRS processed around 28 trillion lines of data. The amount of data you have to process nowadays to find your money is simply prohibitive for anything other than, say, the major publishers. So the ability for PRS to invest in collectively doing all of that and doing it efficiently and doing it at a very, very low cost to individual creators is one of the key parts of what PRS offers. So, when you join PRS, it's £100 to join, one-off fee. You grant your rights to us, and then for as long as you want us to, we will license those rights. We will protect those rights when there's copyright infringement. We will collect any royalties due to you, not just in the UK, but anywhere in the world. We do collect anywhere in the world, and then distribute that money back to you. And as Simon says, for a songwriter, particularly for a songwriter who isn't necessarily an artist in their own right, their copyright is, 85-90% of their annual income. And, making sure that you get that money when your work is played on an advert in Brazil or on played live in San Diego, and knowing that that's happened and knowing that you're getting the money coming through to you is really important in terms of your sustaining your career. So that's PRS's fundamental purpose: license, collect, and distribute on behalf of our members.
So well, in the licensing term, we negotiate with the major companies to set a value as best we're able with those companies. So we do that on a collective basis with the publishers who put their rights in, and with the writers who put their rights in, who are independent.
So yeah, it's worth bearing in mind. Obviously, we do composers, publishers, and songwriters' rights. We have PPL, which is a separate organisation which does, the artists, the sound recording, record labels' rights. So, from our side, we do just deal with the writers and composers.
Because every time there is a broadcast, someone has to pay the people that create the music and publish the music. So that's in a very short term, that's what we do, is we make sure that happens to them as best as possible.
Brilliant. Okay. So what was the you mentioned another organisation for engineers and producers? Does PRS work closely with
PPL is a sound recording, so it's the artist and the record label, so they represent them. So yeah, you're right. If you were to take a traditional song, in copyright terms, you have the copyrights that are attributed to the composition, so the work itself, for which a composer gets two fundamental rights, one of which are the right to authorize its public performance and the right to reproduce, so the right to copy. So both of those rights are fundamentally granted to the composer, and songwriter. They may choose to give some of those rights to a publisher, they may not. On the sound recording side, it's actually the record label that owns all the rights. But what you will have as an artist is have a remuneration right against some types of exploitation. Broadcast is the classic one, and public performance. So PPL deal with the artists and the labels, we deal with the composers, the publishers. So we manage those two sets of rights on reproduction and public performance.
To put it another way, because I know you asked me a question earlier about MCPS and PRS. So that's what John's talking about with the there's the right in the song for the performance of the song. There's the reproduction right, which is the MCPS, or the mechanical right. PPL is if I played tambourine on Let It Be, you get that's PPL income. It's for the performance on that, which is John just said is from the record side. And all those licenses, all shops, pubs, clubs, all have to pay a license for all those rights.
I think it's probably true that, Simon, you're correct. I don't think it would be possible to have a career as a songwriter, composer, without being a member of a collecting society, whether that be PRS or somewhere else, because anywhere, your ability individually to track down your usage is just impossible. And you'd spend your whole time doing deals for 20p or £1, and the other time trying to find the usage. So if you really want that career, whether it's PRS or, clearly I'd say join PRS, but whether it's another society, that has to be a fundamental thought process for any professional songwriter and composer.
And there's a worldwide network of collection societies like PRS in each territory, and we're linked to all of them. We have reciprocal rights, is what they're known as, so that they collect for us, we collect for them, and it's all totted up and balanced out and sent around the world. Which is, I mean, actually, just going back to when I first met Trevor, he said, "Oh, you got to join PRS," because I'd never heard of it, obviously. And I'd had my first tip with Give Me Back My Heart, and then suddenly I started getting all these checks, and I could not believe it, because they were quite reasonable at the time. But the thing that struck me the most, because they used to come in these big computer printouts by the sack load once upon a time. I still got them, actually. They're really funny. And but there'd be countries I hadn't even heard of. There'd be like £4.11 from somewhere, and that's the magic of collecting society. That's why, as John's just said, if you want to be an artist in any way, you need them, really need them.
To give you an idea of scale, so kind of say last year we distributed around £650 million in royalties. So, and that was a COVID impacted year. We lost all of our live revenue that year. We lost an enormous amount of public performance revenue. So we're, on bearing in mind we've grown year on year in terms of revenue, we're about a £750 million business, and we generally distribute out, 650+ million a year out to songwriters, composers, and publishers. So that's, it's an enormous sum of money, an enormous contribution to the industry, and we're actually one of the oldest musical institutions in the UK, well over 100 years. And we're also one of the largest in terms of the number of people we employ in terms of collecting and licensing all those works. So we're a big part of that sector.
Brilliant. So how do people sign up for PRS? Because obviously we talked about all the benefits. Where should people go to do that?
You literally need to go onto the PRS website. There are a couple of criteria here, and it's worth always noting that you have to, in the first instance, own copyright. So you have to have written a unique track, that you own the copyrights in, and you generally have to have had that work performed publicly. So and that can be anything from, it can have been on the student radio, or you could have played it live, or it could be on YouTube or SoundMouse. So you need to meet those qualifying criteria. I think, in that it does cost £100 and it is just a one flat off fee for the rest of your life. Clearly, you need to be thinking about, am I going to make money from these rights? If you're only playing one or two times, you're not planning to play it again, maybe now's not the time to join. But no, it's a simple process that you do online, and you pay £100 and you become a member, and then you enter into the system, you register all your works with us, and when your works are played and we find those works, then we distribute money back to you. It's not more complicated than that in theory. So anyone can join with that criteria.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So how do you guys cover like streaming services?
So streaming's a really interesting one, and Simon touched on some of this, because if you take a sort of step back, what traditionally collecting societies used to work like, there was a collecting society in every country in the world. The local members joined that local society, and they licensed the local shops, the local broadcasters, the local TV services. And then all of a sudden online came along, and if you're Spotify, I don't want to do 50 different licenses for Europe, for example. I want to do one license with as many rights as we can and minimize my kind of licensing context. So actually there was a massive evolution in the way in which rights were managed around online. And what we now see is a kind of big licensing hubs. So there's about 2 or 3 in Europe where you'll bring, so the one that we have a part ownership and control of brings together the German and the Swedish and the UK repertoire, and we license now, rather than just license in the UK, license out to around 50 to 60 territories for the big streaming services. And again, the biggest shift, and this is sometimes quite difficult to get people to kind of understand, the biggest shift in online was, if you were to take a broadcaster, what would traditionally be agreed is they would pay you a lump sum. Right, so that might be 3% of their revenue, 5% of their revenue, whatever that number be. You'd get a lump sum, and then you'd get your work. So if they performed 100 works and they paid £100, each work got £1. Right, so it was simply that you paid a flat fee for what we call a blanket license. That changed completely with streaming, and that's where we started to get into this micro payment mechanism. So they don't pay a flat fee for their license. What they do is effectively pay a per stream rate. So that's why we have to process so many lines of data, is we get a data file. Effectively, every time anyone presses play on Spotify, on Deezer, on Apple, on YouTube, we get a line of data, and we have to work out whether we own the rights in that song and then make a claim on it. And that's why the process of licensing and collecting and distributing online is so complex, and actually why we've ended up with these kind of very small micro payments, rather than traditionally, as you would say in a broadcast, you'd get a lump sum and then backward reverse it. Now we work out, what have you used, what can we get from you? So that was the big shift in online. And I think Simon touched on this earlier. The questions around YouTube were that YouTube, prior to being bought by Google, certainly built its business model on not paying anyone. It was as simple as that. It was as simple as that. They built their, and this is, we see this time and time again, actually, much as SoundCloud is a different model in terms of where it started and where it evolved to. What they do is they give content away for free in order to build their user base, because it's ultimately their user base that they're selling. So YouTube, after giving everything away for free, didn't have any money to pay for it, having X millions of users. So when it comes to selling to Google or Microsoft or whoever, they're selling a user base, and that's how they end up making the money. So the background as to why those user uploaded platforms are the way they are is because they set up deliberately intending to pay no one and then to sell them on quickly with a high user base.
If I could just quickly jump in with a quick question. In terms of, because there's a difference, but also they're kind of intrinsically linked between licensing and publishing. Could you kind of explain that to everyone as to what they are? And also think organizations like Centric, how they work alongside PRS, things like that?
So publishing involves licensing in a sense. So, publishing involves the publishing rights in that respect. So licensing is the relationship between those who own and control the rights and those who want to use them. Whereas publishing is where, and Simon, you're better placed to describe a publishing agreement than me, so I'll let you touch on that. In terms of, how do you mean by the different kind of the other operators in the market? Is that your kind of question?
Yeah, and kind of how they work alongside each other, but are kind of slightly different things. I mean, I think some people get confused between the difference between licensing and publishing.
Well, I'll let Simon explain the kind of publishing side of the business, but publishers also license as well. So that's where there's kind of key distinction. And in terms of, I'll let Simon finish on the publishing point.
Okay, so from a creator's point of view, a writer's point of view, to give you a real example, when I met Trevor Horn, he offered me a publishing deal. So he paid me a sum of money as an advance against my royalties, and then he acquired the rights through his publishing company to all my songs for a period of time. So anything I wrote, he would publish. Now, as a publisher, his job then was to exploit those bits of those songs, that catalogue, if you like, my songs, so that I would earn some money from them. And then the publisher takes a percentage of that income as their profit. And then after that, you get your share of the income. So that's music publishing. Now, publishers, there's some very, 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 very big publishers now, which has kind of changed the world somewhat, like Universal, for example, or Sony ATV, who have acquired millions and millions and millions of songs. So they have this huge repertoire of stuff. And this is going to go back to John in a minute with the licensing side. And they for example, a TV station will want a whole load of music. So they can say, well, look, we can supply you this amount of catalog, and it will cost you this in terms of a sync license or for the right to use it. This is where it gets confusing. However, the artists will still get their performing rights regardless, but it's the publisher is able to license that on behalf of the writers, but then they're doing it on behalf of themselves because control so many multi-millions. And that's where it all gets a bit thorny, because so much stuff can go into the nature of the license, which is well removed from somebody just exploiting my works to make Simon a bit of money. Sorry, John, have I dropped a
No, I
bit
think
of a
you look.
pebble in the water
Let
there?
me, if I draw it out slightly. So when I started, I talked about the public performance right and the reproduction right. Yeah. Normally, a songwriter would give their public performance right to PRS to manage, and normally their mechanical reproduction right, they may or may not do a deal with the publisher, and the publisher would effectively, they would transfer those rights to the publisher, who would give them an advance, and in exchange for that would take 30-ish, 30, 40, 20, 30, 40%, depending upon your deal, of any income that came in down that side, and return 70% to you. So as a songwriter, you'll be getting your money for your performing rights from PRS and your money from your reproduction rights from your publisher in that mechanical.
Mechanical, MCPS, yeah. There's also another thing here I've just thought of, actually. In the modern world, with everything now being online, just for, you know, the student factor here and those seeking a career in the future, you don't necessarily need to have a publisher. It can be very advantageous, because if you get the right relationship, they can really help you develop your career. But it's quite, you know, they do exist, but it's harder. However, there is, with social media and the way people are now able to contact multi-million people around the world, if you get thorough about understanding your rights, you can just go direct to the collection societies, and you don't have to have a publishing deal. For what it's worth, most of my stuff I self-publish now, because luckily enough I understand the system. So that if something goes well for me, then I would get all the rights. I don't have to give a chunk away. But you do need to understand the system. However, it is becoming more common for young people, if they can get it organized and they don't need an advance to live, because there's many ways of generating income, you don't have to have a publisher. But I'm not knocking publishers, because it can be very advantageous if you get the right relationship. But the key is the right relationship. Find somebody you can work with who genuinely wants to look after your works and thinks you're cool and stuff, you know. But you don't need to, because it's a different world, and you know, I'm from the old school, but I understand.
And I think that's the key point. It's worth, you know, if you look at the big transition to digital from a songwriter composer's perspective, which is, if you go back to the CD era, there was a period of time in which the CD was generally sold about 6 to 9 months after the release window. It was selling at, you know, roughly £9.99, £10, and that £10 was split evenly across the 10 tracks, and for the, you know, for the £1 for each track was equally split across the songwriter. So what, as a songwriter, maybe 10, 15 years ago, you would tend to get would be fairly large lump sum payments. So you'd have your 9 months when the CD was sold, and then Simon, maybe a year later, you'd get a check or a payment for that period of time when that record sold. So when you moved into online, what we're seeing less and less of are those big lump sum checks you get 9 months after the track was released. What you're looking at is effectively a drip feed of income over a much longer period of time. Now, I don't think any of us really know whether that drip feed over 10 years is the same as, less than, or more than what would have been the check for the CD quite yet. But it does mean the economics of kind of having large sums of money to invest in your business as a songwriter, up and down, is much more of a flat line. That has clearly changed the economics of songwriting. But as what Simon, I think, is rightly pointing out, is all, but what is equally true, your route to market is easier than it's ever been, in terms of your ability to put your works online yourselves, ability for you to perform your works online yourself, or even in person. So I think there's balance between, if you know your rights and can control more of them because you're self-serving, then actually that keeping that drip feed of money as big as possible is actually the challenge in the digital world, rather than expecting these big sort of peaks and troughs.
Brilliant. Cheers, guys.
I've just got a quick question. So it's becoming more and more common for artists and producers to try and get their music to blow up on TikTok. I was wondering how PRS covers TikTok.
Yeah, TikTok's been a long process of negotiation with TikTok. I think initially, look, and this comes back to what Simon was talking about historically. In the old safe harbour legislation, suggests that and I'm shorthanding here, if somebody else put it there, then that person's responsible for it. So if you upload it onto TikTok, then the person who uploaded is responsible for the copyright. I think we've kind of moved slightly beyond that debate. And TikTok's even more complicated because of the shortness of the videos, and there's this weird concept sometimes out there that there's a copyright exception for incidental music or for really short music. There isn't. There never has been. There probably never will be. The extent copyright fundamentally is all or part of the work. So, yeah, no, we had a long licensing negotiation with TikTok, and we have settled a deal with them, in the same way they've settled a deal with publishers and writers. I think the problem with TikTok, in a sense, is it's even more complicated than YouTube, because at least there's a clear monetization in YouTube. That there's ad load in the beginning, ad load in the middle, usually ad load alongside. You've got pushing, I would argue, unsuccessfully their subscription model, because why are you going to pay for something you get for free? But I never understood their subscription model. But TikTok is that bit more complicated because it doesn't have that clear sort of monetization strategy, and clearly it has no interest in going behind a paywall. But that said, anyone who spends any time on TikTok, or in my case, a 9-year-old daughter who spends all her time on TikTok, all you hear is music. All you hear is people dancing to music. All you hear is songs. So there is a deal in place, I think, in that it's the fastest growing social media platform in the world. Everyone's watching this space as to whether that deal is the right deal and whether that deal needs to adapt as we go forward, not just collecting societies, but the whole industry.
Brilliant, thank you. What are the questions? So obviously PRS has been around since, I think it said 1914 when I did my...
Just over 100 years.
Just over 100 years, yeah.
And you've been through a lot of changes through that time. I was wondering, how do you adapt to new forms of media, whether it be vinyl going to cassette tapes, going to CDs, now going to digital? And especially since the turn of the millennium, has there been any problems or difficulties that you didn't foresee happening, and how did you overcome them as a company?
Well, I'll have a stab at it and see if Simon agrees.
Sorry, that was a bit of a weird question.
I think the shift to from physical to download was relatively smooth, because it was an ownership model in a sense, because you were simply going from, I own it in this format and now own it in another format. And, the shift between, vinyl to cassette to, CDs to DAT tape, all of that sort of thing was relatively just, in format terms, you're maybe negotiating with different people. But it was always on the basis of ownership. I'm buying it, I own it, I'll play it for as much as I want until it breaks and I might buy another copy. Streaming shattered that, because no one owns anything anymore. No one owns music anymore. What I'm doing is I'm paying a fee to access. And the moment I stop paying that fee, I don't have any of that music anymore. So shifting from a kind of ownership to a kind of almost effectively a rental model, where I'm just renting music for or access to music. And I think the other shift that came around that was, unlike, say, in TV, where I've got Netflix offering something different from Amazon, who's offering something different from Apple, who's offering something different than Disney, all of these streaming services offer access to exactly the same repertoire. It isn't like I'm going to buy an Apple Music and a Spotify, because why would I? The repertoire is exactly the same. So in a sense, what we've created is a music industry all you can eat buffet at the same price across all. There is no a la carte. There is no restaurant where you're willing to go and pay £25 a month for that really special service. So that transition from that transition out of the physical into the download, albeit kind of micro payment singles rather than albums, and there was definitely a shift in that period of time, over to the rental model, over to the all you can eat buffet style of music consumption. I think we're all still wrestling with it because no one actually, Simon's right, the market is growing and we're seeing more and more money coming in, but the only reason the streaming market is growing is because subscription is growing, right? That's the only growth. Spotify, Deezer, Apple have not put their prices up Spotify haven't put it up in, coming on 7-8 years. In the same period, Netflix have put it up 3 times. So the only growth is happening in the music industry is subscription. And we're starting to see that tail off in Europe. We're starting to see that tail off in North America. There's still some growth in South America. There is going to come a point in the not too distant future where you've reached your plateau of just making money by getting more people to subscribe. And then the question comes, who goes first? How much is the price rise? What are people willing to pay? When we get to that point, we'll get into another interesting conversation about really what the streaming market's paid. So that transition, ownership to rental, was definitely the biggest one that I think that the whole music industry, not just PRS, has been through.
Okay. And what do you anticipate will be like the next big shift in how music is consumed? Or is that too far in the future to think of?
It's very hard to. I mean, you might have an answer for this, John, but it's very hard to. Now everything is digital and it's on demand. I can't, unless there's a sort of revolution and people want ownership again, which there are little signs of occasionally.
For me, I think it will be a blending of music into just about everything else. And you if you look at, if you go to parts of China where they have, augmented reality, virtual reality, kind of, they all sit in conferences and they, and they do conference centers and they go on roller coasters and, these kind of the away days that kind of happen in augmented and virtual reality. And, nobody, the idea of sitting with a virtual reality headset on with no sound or no music or no atmospheric, noise is never going to work. So I think it's going to be that combination where music it becomes the essential kind of accompaniment to so many other things, particularly as we move into that virtual world space. So we might, I think we're going to see much more of that. Of course, there'll always be music, as in tracks, as in songs, and there'll always be music as there is in film and TV. But this kind of, if you ever play a video, any of you, those who play video games, actually most of the time you don't even notice the music that's going on behind you, but actually sometimes you've got, massive orchestra produced music going on in those video games, particularly some of the big ones. And I think that's where we might see, as that immersive technology kicks off, I think there's going to be a massive opportunity for music in there.
I've got a quick one as well. Obviously with COVID and everything that's happened with it, with regards to like the live music aspect of things, in terms of royalties, with regards to more and more bands are playing live online, and how does that affect? Obviously, they will get some sort of royalties from that, but would you see that as being like a major change to the way royalties are collected for live performances, or?
Yeah, so I saw a figure, one of the industry commentators who was kind of predicting that online live concerts would be kind of worth upwards of $200 million by about 2026. I'm not so sure. I think what we will see going forward is that online live concerts will be, because at the moment they're a replacement for live. No one's got any choice; they have to do it. I think what you might see going forward is it being complementary. So if you're a big stadium act, you might say, okay, we're going to live stream that NEC performance in Birmingham and sell tickets around the world. But my guess is they'll probably only do it once or twice on a tour at maximum. Because the reality is the economics, if you're big, if you're doing a big ticketed event with the production values that you need, there isn't, and the infrastructure you need, there isn't always a big saving, in some of those models. So I think, I don't think it will replace it. I think it will become part of the ecosystem. And I think it's just worth stressing on that. If you're an artist now and you want to live stream, you can do that on YouTube, you can do that on Facebook. All of those things are freely available. They're already licensed. You haven't got to worry about them. You just, use a Facebook Live. I think where it gets much more complicated in licensing terms is where you start doing ticketed events, because what then tends to happen is, and we've seen this, that you'll get 2 or 3 tickets in America, maybe 1 ticket in, Brazil, 1 ticket in Japan. And all of a sudden, what you're looking for is a global license. And in 100+ years of collecting societies, no one's secured a global license yet, and which we are working on it. But I think, there are options now in terms of using it for complementary mechanisms. But going forward, I think it will be there, but probably not as big as others think it will be.
One thing I have heard talk of, though, on the artist street, as it were, is that this is going to create a new form of theatre in a way. Because, a lot of live gigs, depending on what sort of act they are, there'll be an awful lot of live stuff. There'll be recorded stuff running to enhance the band. I think some of these gigs will act as, they'll look like live gigs, and you can dress them up in a warehouse or a garage somewhere. But a lot of the music feed will be preordained, and you'll have a bit of posing on top. And, ooh, baby, good evening, Newcastle. So I think it's going to produce a new type of gig, ticketed gig is what I think. I'm planning on doing one with Tori.
She's doing a couple, isn't she? Her and Robert. There was something in the newspaper, Telegraph, yesterday, I think.
That's right. No, they've got this thing running at their Sunday lunch, which is very, very funny indeed. And you want to watch it. They do a cover every Sunday.
Wasn't the last one they did Enter Sandman? And was that last week? Yeah,
it was one of them. Yeah, it was one of them.
Yeah, it was an experience.
Yeah, but yeah, that's right. No, that's one of the things that's drawn attention to. Yeah, the joke is,
well, I think she was riding an exercise bike while singing it as well. It was, yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Leave it
anyway. There are a lot of things that stick out about that video.
Very nice.
But it's doing very well. They're getting huge amounts of subscribers. It's fantastic.
I think the value of an artist talking and doing much more talking, performing in that format could work actually. There's a lot, and certainly we've seen some of that. I saw Katie Melliver do something like that as well, where you might actually engage with your fans a bit more and have a bit more personal one-to-one contact. That's what I think there's value going.
Yeah. I agree.
So Simon, with your music for TV, it's like your introductions and things like that you do. Is that covered under PRS, or is that something else?
Indeed, no. I get every time anything of mine is broadcast anywhere, I get a performing royalty. The mechanical side in TV is often bought out, which is a problem. If it's commissioned, if say I have stuff on the BBC News channel that runs all the time, and if that's there is no, because that's commissioned by them for their use, there is no mechanical royalty in that. So, but I get the performance in it. So every time it's paid, I get a little something. Does that answer the question?
I've just had a thought. So I've seen things like on Match of the Day, for example, where they have an artist's music just without the vocals, just like playing it underneath a clip. I assume that's covered under PRS. Yep. And then how does that work with like iPlayer and things like that?
So in exactly the same way, really, yeah. So basically, again, we get a whole load of data. In theory, a broadcaster gives you a whole load of cue sheets. It will say for this program, the music cues for this, and then we use those cue sheets to work out how to pay. Same with the iPlayer. You just get a line of data saying, Match of the Day or Top Gear was played this many times, and we use that to calculate the value of each of those streams and pay out to the writers that are due. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. if any of the audience have any questions, feel free to ask them. We missed one from Shannon for Simon earlier, which was, how has your relationship with instruments developed through your career? And out of all the instruments you play, is there one which you carry close to your heart / which drives most of your inspiration?
Actually, that's very interesting. I think guitar I prefer. I mean, I play a few things, but guitar is very, very physical, and you can play the same chord in a million ways. I mean, you can to a degree on piano, but certainly with keyboards, it's very different. It's less tactile in a way, but the guitar is so tactile and so emotional. You could just bend one note on a string in a certain way, and it will speak to you, which I've always found fascinating. It could be an angry day, a quiet day, a romantic ooh baby day, you know, and you can get all of that out of one chord, actually.
How did you get started playing guitar, considering you're from quite like a classical background?
Well, I persuaded my dad when I was 13 to buy me a guitar. So, of course, I ended up with a classical guitar, which is not quite what I had in mind, but I was very grateful. And I went into his little room and got his tape recorder out and stuck the microphone inside it and, you know, turned it. So that's how I got closest to it. That was the first instrument, really. And but then after that, I got a little job and I started saving up, and I bought a 12-string guitar, which was good, and then saved up a little bit more and bought my first little electric guitar from Woolworths, actually. A little Woolworths audition stack and a Jedson guitar, and that was it. Oh God, I was off.
Brilliant. I think that's most of the questions that I had written down. John, do you have any more?
No, I'm all good. Yeah, everything's been well and truly covered, I think.
Alex has just sent me. He's got another question about music copyright. If we could get him back on the call, that'd be fantastic.
Hi again. I was just wondering, another quick question about music copyright is, recently I was reading up on an article about Twitch, which is like obviously a streaming gaming site. You know, people play game music in the background, and I know that I think it was in North America that there was a new bill apparently, like which being passed or was under review, about how like music copyright is administered through like streaming on games, when streamers are like playing music in the background. And I remember actually that it got to the point where, because it was like the streamers were using it so much, and like there wasn't any any money being paid back towards the artist, that they were making it like to the point to a felony offense to play music while streaming games. I was wondering how is that gonna will that be like an effective way to kind of like make sure that artists are paid correctly, and all the distribution of royalties are going back straight to the artist instead of streamers making a profit instead of the artist?
So there's a number of different levels to your question. I think if anything you think Simon and I have said is confusing about copyright, then trust me, the US system is about 100 times worse. And the bill you're talking about was called the Music Modernization Act, which came in pre-Trump. It was actually the last piece of legislation under Barack Obama, and it was designed to reflect the fact that nobody actually knew who was licensing what, and a lot of things weren't being licensed in the US, and they were trying to simplify it. Twitch is another really interesting example of a service which looks like a broadcast service but claims it isn't a broadcast service, and claims it's merely providing a pipe between A and B. So you've got the question is, who's liable for that copyright? The pipe who's broadcasting it from A to B, or the person who is broadcasting it themselves? And depending on how you answer that question is, are you licensing one person, Twitch, which as it happens to be owned by one of the largest multinational tech companies in the world and is making money for it, or do you go after the hundreds of thousands of gamers who are broadcasting it themselves. Clearly, as a licensing body, the last thing you want to do is to go after the hundreds of thousands of individuals, when actually you want to do is go after Twitch. So their Twitch is not unusual, but obviously it's massive. It's, you know, I think it would be fair to say if that happened on YouTube, and, you know, if you were sitting there watching a video of Fortnite on YouTube, then the music in that would be paid through to PRS if we could find it from YouTube. But where it's a live stream, in a sense, if you think the way that YouTube works is it uses content ID, so it finds the work, it matches it against the sound recording, and then it spits out a bit of data. That technology is not quite as effective at live streaming, and one of the biggest problems we've all got is how do you track works on live stream. So video games, Twitch, absolutely a licensing opportunity, absolutely ongoing conversations, discussions about how best to monetize it. But I agree with you, that's, you know, you can fill Wembley with people watching other people playing FIFA 21. Do you know what I mean? It's clearly where that kind of value sits, and we all know that, you know, if you get a work in FIFA 21, it goes on the Spotify playlist called FIFA 21, and, you know, my 13-year-old son listens to it over and over and over again. So the links are there. I don't think the industry's quite got the value right, but we have to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously when these gamers, they're not obviously like, you don't really want to go after them because they're just kind of like only trying to provide, you know, music for the background for their thing, but at the same time you want to make sure that the artist is getting their fair due of money, so the value is there. So it's like, it's in a way it's a bit hard because it's like you want to, you know, they're just trying to make a living and they probably get like a percentage taken off their revenue when, you know, after they finish the live stream. Obviously Amazon, who owns Twitch, and Twitch will take a percentage off. But it was good to hear some feedback because obviously it's just, you know, interesting how they're going to try and sort that one out and try and make sure that the money is going, some money at least, going back towards the artist and not straight to Amazon, Twitch, or sadly even the gamer himself. But thank you.
I think actually it's kind of the point I made earlier about augmented reality. Whilst, you know, the player, the user who's playing is playing music, because who wants to watch 2 hours worth of a Twitch video without music? Do you know what I mean? So it's about they're adding value to what they're doing, and all we're saying is if you're adding value, then there's someone who needs to share in that value. And I think that's the broader debate you get into.
Very much.
Cheers, Alex.
Cheers, Alex. Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you, Simon. That's been brilliant, really informative. Thank you. Everyone in the chat and in the room, John and Simon are going to be hanging around for about 25 minutes now. So if anyone has any questions for them, feel free to give them a tap on the shoulder, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them. Thank you from Alex and me as well for day one of Industry Day 2021. And thanks very much. See you later.